Domestic. Domestic means right here in our own country. So when we talk about what is domestic policy, we're talking about things that happen in America that our government, either the federal government or state government, and some degree local government, have to deal with. Most of the time, though, domestic means inside the United States, a policy of the United States government, right? Because everything dealing with the states would be inside that state. It's not like Nebraska is going to be dealing with issues of South Carolina and setting policy for South Carolina. So domestic, really, when we talk about domestic policy, it's more of a federal government issue. And it's really the issues that are important to the whole nation that the federal government is taking action on or producing policies or creating policies to deal with. So when you think of domestic, think of inside the United States. So it may be an issue that dominates the news, or it may be something that's a little bit more low-key or on the back burner, so to speak. But domestic issues are an important part of what the federal government does. In fact, it might be more than half. It might be the main issue. Now, there are foreign policy issues. So America doesn't exist all by itself. It does have to interact with its neighbors. It trades with its neighbors and other countries around the world, and there's diplomatic relations. And things that happen in Canada may affect us. Things that happen in China may affect us. But generally, domestic issues are an important part of what our government thinks about every day. There's another video dealing with foreign policy, and the two really are important. It's hard to talk about one without the other. And we'll talk more about how they're connected over the next couple minutes. So when you think of domestic issues, think about issues within America that the president and Congress and other parts of our federal government generally have to deal with. And maybe it's easiest to really think of domestic policy by some of the ones that are very common. Some of the ones that have been in the news over the last 10, 20 years that you're probably familiar with. So really any issue that comes up within America would be considered a domestic issue. And the president and members of Congress generally have to deal with it. So a couple big ones recently, healthcare. 10 years ago, it was trying to give universal health care, health insurance to everyone in America. More recently, in the last year or two, obviously, pandemic and the coronavirus and COVID-19 have been really dominating the domestic policy and the domestic agenda of the president and Congress, right? They want to get a handle on this, and it was extreme, hot and heavy right when it first came out, and now a couple years into it, it still may be one of the biggest domestic policy issues. What will our government do? How will the government handle this? Will there be federal rules about wearing masks and vaccinations and all that? So healthcare is, and has been for a while, one of the main domestic policy issues. And again, you can't really think about healthcare without thinking about how the United States relates to other countries, right? So this is typically a domestic policy issue, but if people travel and they get exposed to this and this virus and they bring it back to the United States, so there's all kinds of implications with healthcare. So even though we typically say it's a domestic issue, it does have some foreign policy components to it as well. Energy, do we have enough energy? How do we get that energy? Is it solar, wind, coal, hydroelectric, geothermal, fracking? These are all energy issues that are really sometimes, I guess over the last 10, 20 years as well, been in the forefront of a lot of the discussions that leaders are having. Most recently, solar and wind and clean energy and switching away from maybe some fossil fuels and coal burning. Chances are the electricity that you're using to charge your computer or to power your house right now most likely is coming from coal burning somewhere. And that's coal is producing electricity that travels down some wires and into your house. So we haven't come a long way yet on solar and wind. It's just the technology maybe isn't there yet. But the discussion about how we get our power and energy is part of the domestic policy. Again, you can't talk about this without talking about foreign affairs. We bring in a lot of oil from other countries, and that is a factor. It shapes how much we pay for gas, for your car, and your car your parents drive. So it's all connected. But typically, energy has been one that we've talked about as a domestic policy. Education is another. It kind of comes and goes, but now it seems to be connected with the healthcare and the COVID-19, how we deliver education, whether we're live or remote. That's all connected. It tends to be a domestic policy issue. The food we eat, generally in America, we don't really worry about it being safe. But I can tell you this, if we had a time where this food started to be not safe, people started getting sick and we didn't know why, the food we eat would be a big domestic policy issue. And again, there's components to foreign policy. A lot of the food we eat comes from other countries. Even though we can grow enough of our own food here to feed us, we do import a lot of food, whether it's wheat or animal products or other things we eat. Fish, for example, comes from other countries. So it's hard to say this is solely a domestic issue. I wouldn't say it's on most people's top 10 list, because I think we live in a great country where we feel like our food is safe, and generally it is safe. One of the big ones that, if you're in public office, whether you're president or members of Congress, you're always watching, and that is a main domestic policy issue, is the economy. So when we think of the economy, think of like our main money system. That's what an economy is, our main money system. Money that's flying around from computer to computer, money that's being spent at Taco Bell or at Walmart or at GameStop or whatever, just the money that's flowing. So if the economy is doing well, then people like the president and members of Congress are happy. If things start to get a little off track, then this can really cost a president his job, members of Congress their job, because it is maybe one of the most important domestic policy. Again, not all by itself though, right? If the world economy starts to tank, if things are happening in the United Kingdom or in Japan and their economy is falling apart, it will have an effect on America as well. And the stock market is one indicator of how our economy is doing. So you can see by the bear and the bull market. I don't know if you learned this in economics, but a bull market is a market that tends to be going up, whereas a bear market is a stock market that tends to be going down. So if you had a bear market for a long time, politicians are probably in trouble. They're trying to figure out what's going on with our economy. And another indicator is who has jobs, what kind of jobs do they have. These are all important domestic policy issues that the president and members of Congress think about a lot. If you're a hardworking, say, coal miner and you're not making very much money, you don't have a lot of extra money to spend. Well, if nobody's spending money, then that causes an economic problem. If everybody's spending too much money, that causes inflation, and that's an economic problem. So remember, inflation is when prices are going up pretty quickly, and the value of money tends to be going down. So if you're a coal miner, there's a lot of things. Let's try to think about this from their perspective. Okay, so the country might be having a difficult time figuring out how we want to do our energy, but there seems to be a push to move away from fossil fuels. Well, if you are a coal miner, you dig coal out of the ground and you burn it to make electricity. And if we don't want that anymore, or there's a mood in the country that we don't want it, then you might lose your job. And then you have no money to spend. And there's all kinds of ripple effects from how the economy is doing. If the economy is doing well, generally, a rising tide will lift all boats. But it is one thing that the president and members of Congress are always watching, is how the economy is doing, how many people are unemployed, what's the inflation rate, meaning how fast are prices going up and are people's incomes going up. And if the country is suffering in terms of its money system, if people don't have enough money or the economy is slow, then that's bad news for people who are elected, because we tend to blame them. And we'll talk more about that at the very end. But generally, speaking of this, the president is the first one we blame or the first one to be given credit. It's a tough job. He's the single most, or she's the single most powerful person in our government, so they either get all the credit or all the blame. Next would be members of Congress. Another big issue domestically typically is the environment. So this has been on the forefront lately about perhaps global warming and a warming planet. What do we do about that? Can we switch over to green jobs? And if we do that, does that hurt the economy and people? It's all interconnected. But it seems like this has been more of a discussion lately than it has been in, say, the last, 30 or 40 years. It seems now that most people are thinking it should be something that we talk about as a country. But again, most nations in the world think about this. So, and what we do here might have an impact on other countries, and their rules and their regulations and policies they pass may impact us. So even though we think of it as fixing our environment as a domestic issue, it also bleeds over into foreign policy. And something that's been really happening, I guess, over the last just few years is this idea that America is really divided. As you could tell by the survey provided by NBC News recently, that at least, and again, with a survey, you don't know who they're asking and how they're actually wording it. They might just be calling 1,000 people in New York, or they may call everyone across the whole country, but maybe they're only calling people over 80 years old. We don't really know. But I think most people have a sense that America, based on election results and what we see on the news, seems to be rather divided in the direction we want the country to go in. So that is a domestic policy issue, making sure that this is a United States and making sure that everybody feels like they have a part and a voice and that nobody is excluded. So the president and Congress have to worry about this as part of domestic policy. As I said earlier, generally the president is the one who has the most to say about these issues. He or she is the single most powerful leader we have. They are the chief executive, so we expect them to set the course. And when things are going well, presidents shine. If things start to fall apart with the economy or a pandemic or education or health and food issues, then they are the first to be blamed, and it could cost you your job. There have been many first-term, one-term presidents because they took their eye off one of those important domestic issues, namely the economy. And after the president, members of Congress get credit or blame. And again, they may not be able to control everything, but it's just the way a democracy works, a republic works. We have expectations for our leaders. When things go well, we reward them with keeping them in. And if things aren't going well, we tend to vote for other people. But remember, domestic policies are issues dealing with really within the United States, but they all also have some connection to other countries as well. We are really just not an island, right? We are connected to everyone, every nation nowadays especially. So it's hard just to say what happens in America stays in America. That's not how it really works. But typically domestic issues are issues within America.